Welcome to ESG Decoded, where we navigate the evolving landscape of environmental, social, and governance, ESG. Join me, Amanda Kuhl, and Erika Schiller as we explore the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and ethical leadership.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ESG Decoded. My name is Erika Schiller, and I'll be your host today. Joining me, I have Jessica Murray. Jessica is an environmental manager, and she is also the project manager at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, which is called IDEM. And she is project managing the Climate Action Plan. So today we're going to talk about the Indiana Statewide Climate Action Plan, which was funded by the EPA. The EPA provided grants to all 46 states that submitted applications to get funding for a climate action plan. And this work was broken into phases, the first of which being the Priority Climate Action Plan. Jessica, can you share a little bit about what you're doing at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management?
But no, thank you so much for having us here today, or having myself, and being able to just talk about what we're doing with the grant, as well as, climate action plan in general. So at the Office of Air Quality, which is where I work in, we're always looking at ways to reduce air pollution so that Indiana communities can meet air quality standards. And we occasionally work on grants like this one, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And that has been, a huge lift for us. We've been really excited to work on it, but it's been very, very quick. We were awarded the funds in July of 2023, and our first deliverable was due March 1st, 2024. So just, a few months in the grand scheme of planning in order to get everything out the door, ready to go. We had to have a climate action plan, the priority climate action plan, due March 1st, and that had to have significant stakeholder engagement as well as technical analysis. So we were excited that we submitted it on time, and we felt that we had a really good climate action plan that encompassed a lot of Indiana priorities and communities across Indiana concerns.
And that timeline, it was tight because you had to go all around the state, right? And that community engagement was, in kind of a broad mix of cities and towns and communities to ensure that they're aligned.
Yes, so that was one aspect that kind of really had to work through a lot and make sure that we jumped on that quickly. One of the main priorities of this federal grant, as well as from our side, has been low income and disadvantaged communities. So we've tried from the beginning to make sure that our public meetings were in areas where, environmentally overburdened communities could come and share their priorities with us, could make sure that they were heard, and so that we could record their priorities, put them into the plan, and have measures that made sense for Indiana communities across the state. So we had 4 meetings in the beginning. It was in the October-November area, and so those first 4 public meetings, we garnered about 180 participants, both virtual and in person, and these meeting locations were chosen carefully in order to meet with cities that have a large number of underserved census tracts. During the meeting process, we did get feedback that 2 cities felt that they were not effectively engaged with. So then in February, we added a second public engagement process to include Gary and Evansville specifically, and make sure that we understood their priorities and made sure that we could engage with them directly. So we made it an iterative process. And so putting in 6 meetings within just a couple short months was a good exercise for us to plan quickly. We had to make sure that, we had the measures that we wanted to select out there for the community to kind of give us feedback on. So we were very excited that we were able to have a lot of meetings within that short amount of time.
And overall, it sounds like you're really being responsive to the community needs of the state, recognizing that some raised their hand and said, hey, we want to be more involved. I think overall that sounds really positive, as opposed to ignoring or not wanting to participate. I was wondering, could you take a step back and share a little bit about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant and what that is and how you guys came to apply for it in the first place?
Of course. So this grant has two separate phases. And so the Priority Climate Action Plan is part of phase one. And then phase two was implementation funding that aligned with climate measures from that first plan. So we, along with a lot of other states and metropolitan statistical areas, MSAs, but I'll just call them cities from now on, we all wanted to apply for this planning grant so that we could be eligible for the funding grant, which was a pot of almost $4.6 billion that we could have a stake in trying to apply for funding from. And that was a huge driver for that. Being able to bring in money for the state would be really great. So that was one of the areas that we saw opportunity in. But one of the main goals of the Priority Climate Action Plan is to just reduce air pollution across the state of Indiana, and especially in low income and disadvantaged areas. So we were like, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense for our state. There's a lot of opportunities to do that here in Indiana. And the first climate action plan, the goals from this has been to, establish a GHG inventory assessment, select measures based on community engagement, and then quantify greenhouse gas emission reductions for the 10 measures that we picked. So just to give a little background on the climate action plan, like that's what led us to the March 1st deadline. And then April 1st was when we submitted our implementation application, which was an application to the EPA to apply for money that would fund some of the measures within that first climate action plan. Going forward from that, it kind of does a weird turn. It takes a step back to the first phase. So now we have the opportunity to do an extended climate action plan, which is called the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, and that is due to the EPA next summer. And then after that, this is a 4-year planning grant. So at the end of the 4 years, there's a status update. So this really takes in a near-term and long-term view of climate planning for different states and cities, as well as tied funding to the first climate action plan.
That's super helpful. Can you give us a taste of what was in the climate action plan that you just completed, the initial priority climate action plan?
Yes, so we had 10 measures that aligned with Indiana's top emission sources from our inventory and top priorities from Hoosiers. So our inventory spans from electric power sector, industry, transportation, agriculture, and commercial and residential sectors. So we made sure to include a broad list of measures from all those different sectors so that we could reach those top emitting sources. So our measures involved renewable energy, especially solar, energy efficiency, light duty vehicle electrification, industrial electrification, green spaces, and agricultural best practices. So once we had those 10 measures that had community feedback, and we made sure that this was, something that would provide significant greenhouse gas reductions, we quantified each of those measures in our climate action plan. We gave it a greenhouse gas kind of overview. We had co-pollutants and co-benefits as well as a brief workforce analysis. So one of our other goals in this plan too that I kind of forgot to mention earlier was this is something that we want to be a template for communities going forward in Indiana. So we tried to always keep that in mind, that we would like people to come back to these, organizations, communities, and individuals, come back to the plan in the future and see a well-researched near-term reduction plan that they can kind of just make sure that if they had a project or they had something that they wanted to look at, here's where they can start in building, good projects for their communities.
Yeah, so I guess I have a question there. So I know you just submitted the application to actually get funding to implement these priorities. My understanding was because you had a broad range of stakeholders, I'm assuming it included both the community that you mentioned, but also potentially large industrial players or large industrial emissions as part of the overall goal of what the existing greenhouse gas inventory is for the state of Indiana, and then the measures and levers to pull to reduce. do you see in terms of the implementation grant? Would that be targeting individuals? Would it be targeting industry? Is it kind of all of the above? How are you thinking about that aspect of actually implementing and providing the most kind of, is the goal to provide the most impact to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, or most impact to number of community members who receive funding to reduce emissions? How are you balancing that?
Yeah, that's a good question because I've seen different states kind of view that differently. For the EPA, this has been funding for short-term or near-term projects, something that's doable, that's going to get money out quickly and going to provide as much cost benefit as possible. And they've defined cost benefit for a lot of these projects as what is the dollar per greenhouse gas amount reduced. So they've looked heavily at those two areas, as well as the third very important area of how much low income and disadvantaged community reach is there within these projects. And so that's how we've kind of looked at it too. The way that we've looked at this implementation grant was very project based. I've seen a lot of states do more block grants where they're setting up these programs and this is how they're going to do it if they are funded. And then they'll go through the project solicitation. And what we did was kind of upfront look for projects that were already ready to go in Indiana so that we could satisfy that near term ready to implement phase. And then from there we looked at, what is the cost benefit, how much greenhouse gas reduction is happening, and who are these projects reaching. So that was helpful to see how we could use these implementation dollars if funded. So we made sure to apply for a good amount of projects and like statewide, and the projects also had to fit our PCAP measures because that was the prerequisite for this. So, kind of a couple different areas to look for from an implementation standpoint.
Remind us, PCAP, what that means?
The PCAP is the Priority Climate Action Plan. Indiana's is just named Indiana's Priority Climate Action Plan, but I know a few states within the grant program have named it a couple different things.
Can you share an example of a project you said was ready to go for funding? Are those, specific solar fields, or what types of projects are ready to go and ready for funding?
Our grant application too, just to put in a brief plug for it, it's on our IDEM CPRG website. If you go to Google and type that, the first link that pops up, it'll have our grant application as well as the Indiana's Priority Climate Action Plan. And in the implementation application, there are mainly organizations, projects, and nonprofit projects, as well as schools and municipalities. So we really have tried to make sure that if we are funded, this goes directly to communities. For instance, there is a lot of community solar projects that we received, and we thought those are near term, can be implemented very quickly. They had a good cost benefit, which you can see in the application as well. And they reached, especially, school community solar projects or rooftop solar as well for schools, which we had a couple projects in there. Like that would be serving the community and reaching a lot of environmentally overburdened areas.
We'll provide those links in the show notes, but I'm curious, is it public, the list of applications or potential projects that could be funded if the grant is won?
Yes, we did put as much as we could up on our website so that way it could be transparent and that other people could see what type of projects we received. We ended up receiving a ton of good projects, and we had to cut it down almost 10% to what we could submit in our application just to make it the strongest application possible. But we did try to make it as transparent as possible.
That's great. And you mentioned earlier that, some states are approaching the grants differently. I'm curious how collaborative or how open are the discussions with Indiana and other states, because there were 46 of these Priority Climate Action Plan grants funded, right?
Yes. There's also a couple coalitions that formed between states. I think we'll probably see them more if they're funded through the EPA grant. So once that, list comes out of who they've decided to fund for the implementation grant, I'd be very curious to see how many coalitions are there. But between states themselves have taken different approaches to this. This was a very competitive grant, so we all had to kind of think on our feet and make sure that we had the best program going forward. Block grants, for instance, can be, a set of money or a big pool of money that goes towards funding specifically, solar projects or specifically energy efficiency projects. So I did see, that is a quicker route, especially with how short of time that we had for other states to go down. But we in Indiana wanted to initiate a project solicitation and, just see what projects that could come back. So that way, we could see individual GHG reductions. We thought that would be a lot easier to provide a more well-researched GHG reduction number towards the end.
And I hear you say a lot about greenhouse gases, and that's primarily addressing, our impacts to climate change. But on a community level, I'm sure that, individual air quality is going to make the most direct impact on your, the members of your state. So what are those co-benefits, and how are you measuring those and ensuring that you're mitigating any potential negative impacts from these activities?
So the co-benefits from the measures that we've put into the climate action plan, they range from reduced climate impacts and risks, improved public health, job creation, reduced energy cost burden, all the way down to improved housing quality, safety, and comfort. So these co-benefits are very important to the community, and we've really tried to balance having those along with significant GH or greenhouse gas reductions. For instance, some of our measures like agriculture, they can have smaller cost benefit reductions or have a higher cost benefit associated with them, but they do have a great quality of life and resource benefit to them. So that was something that was really important to our decision process as well. And looking at co-benefits and co-pollutants as well was something that we quantified within the climate action plan. Co-pollutants being, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, particulate matters, volatile organic compounds or VOCs. So these smaller pollutants that can still have an impact. And it was interesting to see too, and you can probably see that in our climate action plan, that all of these measures, with the exception of a couple, reduced co-pollutants down to they reduced it pretty well. And the exceptions lie in increased usage of electricity. So if it's, electrifying cars or replacing gas furnaces with heat pumps, there's a little bit of an increase of electricity usage. So with the ratio of fossil fuel use for the grid, that increases specifically sulfur dioxide emissions. Like, not to get too technical, but that there was an increase in just that emission. But if you look at what we applied for in the funding, having more renewable energy on the grid would reduce that fossil fuel ratio. So, there's a lot of different components that go into estimating co-pollutants and co-benefits, but we saw overall that, these measures were going to have really good co-benefits and reduce a lot of co-pollutants.
And in terms of setting goals for the state or targets for emissions reductions, are those addressed in the initial plan, or is that a next phase?
So that is going to be a next phase for the extended climate action plan, the comprehensive climate action plan. So that is what we are looking forward to, in the coming year on working on. In our public meeting, or our public information session yesterday, kind of outlines like what our schedule is, how we're thinking about the extended action plan. And that's going to be really important aspects after we select a couple more measures, which we also promoted a survey with that public information session to, help get more feedback from the public and from Hoosiers on what their long-term strategies for climate action planning would look like. So we're hoping to get some feedback from the public, select more measures, and then go into more quantification and target setting.
Mm-hmm. And I think, did you tell me previously that though you will be setting targets, those are voluntary in the near term?
Yes. So we've made sure that all the measures that we're putting within the first climate action plan and this extended climate action plan, these are completely voluntary measures. So with the intent that it would be quicker to implement, easier to plan. The target setting themselves, or the targets that will be set through these, are voluntary as well. These are just to kind of provide a baseline of where we can get to if we implement these measures, or implement just one or a couple of these measures. So this would be voluntary.
And then the individual cities or your governor and other leaders can take this plan and implement it in their community directly. Is that the goal?
Yeah, organizations, communities, they can come back to this plan and it can be more of a template and more of a here's where we can get to if we implement some of these climate measures, or if we want to do some of these, here's where we can get to. So we're hoping to set up a good template for that.
I think this is exciting to hear, how most of the US states are getting some funding to really move forward, how the US could potentially meet our NDCs, right? Our nationally determined contributions for the Paris Agreement. It comes down to state action, community action, and the funding available to make these investments in adding more renewables to our grid, or, the various other levers in your priority climate action plan. So I really appreciate you taking some time to share what you're doing in Indiana.
No, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to talk about this. I agree with you on that. I am so excited for what this will come down the line, and, what grant funding there might be, what we'll see in the community. And it's great to have Indiana's first ever climate action plan. I think this is a huge step forward. And if anyone would like to know more, I know you said the links would be shared. Would love to see some feedback on our survey if there's any Hoosiers listening, or just happy if anyone would like to follow along on the process of Indiana's climate pollution reduction grant. So thank you again.
Yeah, we'll keep our eyes out for the extended climate action plan. And my understanding is you're expecting a response back from the EPA on any kind of funding for implementation late summer. So we'll definitely keep our eyes open for any announcements.
Yes, fingers crossed.
We're rooting for you. Thank you so much, Jessica. Appreciate your time today.
Great, thank you too.
Whether you're a seasoned ESG practitioner or embarking on your sustainability journey, ESG Decoded is your trusted source for inspiration and actionable insights for responsible business practices. Subscribe on your favorite streaming platforms to be notified of new episodes dropped bi-weekly on Tuesday mornings, and connect with us at ESG Decoded on social media or by visiting www.climeco.com.